So today, one of the topics we were bouncing around in one of our previous discussions was around master data governance, and I think it's a topic that can mean different things to different people. And in my experience, I've been on quite a few projects, and it always seems to be an area that companies struggle with. Particularly, I think if you overlay variant configuration over the top of things, and then you've got your normal integration to other aspects of master data that are not necessarily controlled by VC modelers or the data, sometimes even the data management teams, it can be a can of worms. So I suppose we're happy for the discussion to go in any direction. I know, Brian, you've got some specific things happening at the moment, and maybe you just want to kick off from your angle of what challenges you have.
Okay, and again, this is relatively new. It's going to be probably a 2-year project, my guess. Our leadership team started out with focusing on product hierarchy. This is a third iteration of product hierarchy since 2010, and that's their focus. And they are trying to make sure that the product hierarchy matches what they put out on the internet for things for customers to choose from. The challenge from my side is that's all fine and good for some customers, but a lot of customers prefer their own material numbers and their own names for things. It might not be a cylinder, it might be a winding tube. And it just really, and we're just starting it. I mean, we're done with the first step, which is the product hierarchy. And now we're about to move on to hopefully starting to integrate the needs and wants and understandings of the sales teams from the various places around the planet, which are, because everybody has different customers, even the same customer in different countries has different needs. And so I'm trying to pre-wage the battle to make sure people don't hurt themselves. That's how I see my role, and that's where we're at.
So that's interesting, Brian. I've been involved in data governance in one way or shape or form for my entire career. So as it relates to VC objects, I started off 28 years ago in our legacy system. And the one thing I've learned over all that time is the single biggest problem is not technological, it's cultural. People don't like rules. It's that simple. They don't want to be governed. And I made the statements to my management multiple times. If you're not willing to fire somebody because they won't follow the rules, don't bother to try to enforce the rules. Of course, that never flies, right? They're never willing to fire somebody because they don't want to enforce the rules. But just the concept of saying my data needs to look like this, not like that, even if it's situational. That's a tough concept to get across. And I remember when I was explaining to my CIO one time that my own company had 17 different ways of spelling their name in our customer master. And we shouldn't have that. We should have one way of spelling our name. His response was, well, Google writes algorithms all the time. Just write an algorithm. Yeah, right. Garbage in, garbage out. That's literally what I had to tell him. And he said, I remember hearing that when I was in school. Nothing's changed. But I've found that there's multiple ways you can do some type of data governance once you decide that you want to attempt it, right? So there's what's called proactive data governance, meaning you're going to apply the business rules around a data element on the screen while that data element's being entered. And if somebody enters it wrong, you're going to say, sorry, you're done. And then there's reactive data governance, which says, let them enter the data, and then we'll report it, and we'll monitor it, and we'll fix it after the fact. For each of those two manners of data governance, there's a manual method and there's a programmatic method. It all depends on how deeply you want to get. Then the next problem becomes is which system of record are you going to monitor? You know, let's take material masters, okay? If you're using SAP's material or master data management tool, the material master is part of that. So you can actually master the material master from within the MDM tool. Do you want to? Or do you want to master it in your PLM tool? And then run it through the MDM tool and into SAP. Bills of materials aren't managed by the MDM tool. Variant configuration objects aren't managed by the MDM tool. So you have to find a different way around it. So has anybody had those conversations at either of your businesses about what system of record is going to be governed?
Throwing it open to the floor, I think for mine, it's always a challenge to get whatever system you use to evolve. The business is never static. I'm interested in your thoughts on how you evolve, and I think that example of product hierarchy is a classic example where I've come from in the past. We used it for pricing, and in that instance, pricing and the way that we wanted to be marketed always changed, and the hierarchy itself to rejig to the new marketing structure was horrendous. And I suppose that's my question to the forum is, how do you deal with an evolving business in master data?
Well, that comes back to our engineering change management conversation, right? Which that's one reason the company I was at refused to use the material master product hierarchy. We created a product hierarchy out of classification because at least then we could use engineering change management against it, and it would evolve and keep the history and all of those wonderful things that the material master won't do.
Yeah.
I imagine, Phil, you want to concentrate on the variant configuration objects in this conversation, right?
Well, I'm happy for it to go in any direction because in some ways, often from some of my experiences, we have trouble with keeping everyone aligned. So we have VC modelers who are doing changes. Some of it's break fix, some of it's enhancing functionality, some of it's implementing whatever marketing are after. So there's lots of stakeholders in their pie quite often. And then in some environments, we had the VC modelers won't directly say maintain material masters, for example, because they have various owners as well. And there are times where, and I suppose the governance can fall down because we just get a little bit out of sync with the changes, sometimes the timing of the changes, having the, well, basically the governance or control structures around any change that goes in can cause problems. And I suppose back to your point, Steve, about the proactive, reactive, I doubt there's many companies, well, maybe wrong, that are necessarily proactive. They end up being reactive. You know, they don't know they've got a problem until it stops something, you know, further down the chain. So I think that's something that, you know, we're having similar issues, you know, where the company I work with. So it's bringing all those stakeholders together sometimes to have a common direction, and people realizing that, you know, like I always say with VC or sorry, with SAP, if someone sneezes in one part of the system, someone will catch cold somewhere else, just because of the integration. Yeah, so I suppose from a VC point of view, I'm sort of interested in how other companies blend that into their overall updates.
So Brian, you have a master data management team. Are you using SAP's MDM product?
No, we're using no product. We
Okay.
are, we've been wild, wild west ever since Go Live. I mean, I just learned today that somebody in a different country changed a product description in a material master of something that we sell to people. And it has real consequences. And it's just, so we're just starting the journey, and and my fear is that our people are purely focused on the material master, not the VC data related to it, which is like a whole lot of importance to this stuff. And I that's why I invited people to this meeting, because I need them to understand what I understand, what you guys understand. The VC means a whole lot of complexity, a whole lot of ability, but a whole lot of responsibility. And we're just getting started. I see in our future an amalgam, a bunch of different things working together. I know Steve has seen some of his plants have to merge material numbers and stuff. Well, I think we're going to do a little of that, but we're also going to keep some local stuff. That's just my prediction of the future. But again, the VC portion is what scares me. And we tried ECM. Well, I mean, when we very started, I mean, initial stages, you go in and create a sales order with a configurable, and it was taking 2 minutes to come up on the screen just because of the ECM. Our consultant turned off the check to see if ECM was even existed for that object, and it cut it by 75%.
I'll tell you right now, Brian, you had another problem.
I'm scared of that.
Problem. You had another problem. You had a different problem. So we used ECM, 40,000 sales orders a week, and we didn't have any problem processing because of ECM. We had a problem processing because of our data structures, but not the ECM against those data structures. Okay. So you got something else going on, but that's separate to the conversation. So for a data governance perspective, do you have a data council or a data governance council made up with data stewards and all that wonderful stuff?
That's exactly what we're doing right now. We're building that. We have the stewards, the owners, and the creators have all been identified, you know, and names assigned. It's just we haven't gotten far enough on my portion of the business to be able to do anything with it yet. The part of our business that makes essentially Coke bottles is already done. That's harmonized, that's done. We have a web tool that creates the material master for us, etc. It's just the customized parts. The I don't want a chair, but I want a chair, but I want to design it myself.
Mhm.
And that's where we're at. And that's where we're at.
So here's the bad news. There is no automated tool that I'm aware of that will easily allow you to govern those objects.
And I don't want one. I
Okay.
think it would be a
That's fine.
disaster. I think it's important for that at that point that someone make a human decision.
Well, then the question comes, and this is where it always fell down for us, is what's the cycle time of that decision? Based on, how long does it take to get through the governance council and to get alignment that you can actually make the change and then make the change against the backlog, et cetera, et cetera. It's not fun at all. Now, SAP, some people at SAP would tell you that the product data replication workbench is a type of data governance tool for VC. I say bullshit, quite frankly. PDR is a movement tool. It is not a governance tool. For VC objects, the best I could ever find was either slow down the entire change process with lots of conversations and lots of paperwork and everything else, or be reactive and monitor what happened after the fact. And what we did for that, just so you're aware, is we purchased 2 products from SAP, one called Data Services and one called Information Steward. And Data Services is basically just a clearinghouse. And SAP actually recommends it for many things, including movement to S4. But the thing that's good about Data Services is it can get data from anywhere and apply a limited set of business rules to it, and then put it in a data set that you could access from Information Steward and automate reporting out of that. So that's exactly what we did. For example, for characteristics, I had 3 clients, one in North America, one in Europe, one in Asia, right? And we all had the same, quote unquote, same product models in each system. They weren't the same, they were different, but we used the same characteristics in each client. But there were subtle differences in how they used fields on those characteristics. For example, the characteristic group within the CTO4 screen, right? So I'd pull the characteristics out with Data Services, and I had to have function modules do that because you've got, 4 or 5 tables that are actually involved. And then I'd dump it into Data Services, and then I'd bounce Information Steward against that in an automated job that had more business logic in there to say, show me what the differences are. And then I'd spit out only the differences to the data stewards. And they were the ones that were responsible to solve those problems. It's all reactive. It's after the fact. But for us, that was really what we had to do. We had standards written. Everybody got trained on here's the standards. Here they are. But I would tell you that 20% of the data never got applied the way the standards said the data should be applied.
We're similar, sort of, almost, but our primary reporting tool is ClickView. So we actually download daily the entire data set that you would see in CU table info. So it's updated daily, and you can get all manner of reports against all manner of different stuff based on that right in ClickView. And it's a whole lot easier than writing a whole bunch of different reports in SA and ABAP. But as far as data governance, again, we've got literally everybody has access to MM02.
Yeah, that's a problem right off the bat.
Yeah, I think yeah, I'll just jump in. So like I think, you know, having the stewardship part is obviously the really good step. The other part is, and we've sort of been through this a bit as well, is looking at who has access to what. And we've had to do that for compliance reasons, you know, in general anyway. And there's a bit of effort in actually working through the SAP authorizations, and, you know, and that might be an area that needs changing or restructuring. So it's, you know,
Yep, good point. We're actually in the middle of doing that. We have auditors also who come in.
Yeah.
I think the name
Mhm.
starts with an E, I'm not sure. And yeah, they come in and they say, well, does this person really need that authorization? And so our people are right now, for the past year or so, going through and restructuring and making sure everybody has only what they need.
Yeah, because that helps shut down any leakage of changes that, you know, and it could be like, you know, someone changing a description just because they had access to and had no ownership of what they were really doing. So so I think, yeah, there's like a people governance, I suppose, call it that.
So just be careful how far down that rabbit hole you go, because if you're going to try to manage at the field level, security authorizations, your security organization is going to, they're going to have fits. At the screen level, absolutely, that's not so bad. And that's what we ended up doing on the Material Master. So for example, on the entire finance screens, there were only two groups that had access to that: finance and our PDM group, our product data management group. And product data management couldn't change anything without some type of notification from finance. And typically we would push back and say, you know, really, that's not our job, that's your job. But things like valuation class that affected MRP and so forth and so on, yeah, then we'd get involved. But yeah, it's the whole deal is, how deep do you want to take governance, right? Do you want to take it to the field level and be a dictator? Or do you want to take it at a broad level and just say, good enough, right? And that's the hard question that everybody has to answer, and nobody has actually answered well from a VC perspective, to my knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think there's a middle ground. You're never going to make the system perfect, but you've got to make it reduce the risk, I suppose. You know, because you get situations where just with changes of personnel, you know, the previous person might have really good knowledge of what they're looking after in a material master. The new person coming in with the same access may not have that level of knowledge and change stuff that can cause consequences somewhere. And often that's, you know, things around procurement or, you know, the way the material behaves from a sales point of view or whatever. So, yeah. So I suppose the proactive part is probably getting some of the systems and structures in place that reduces risk.
Well, you have to start with, you know, first getting the management buy-in that this is not going to be easy, right? And you're going to spend money whether you like it or not. Then actually documenting the business rules, that can be a bear. Brian, do you have a set of business rules that's documented with the data standards that goes into each business rule?
We did during blueprint phase, but that was over 10 years ago. And there's, as far as I know, been no considered effort to update any changes to business rules, although I'm pretty sure there weren't many changes in that time, but that's what we had we had it pretty well documented. Not only, but everything that we did was really well documented by our computer competency center team, the SAP experts, our consultants. They did a fantastic job, and I don't think it's been updated, but I'm not sure that there's been any changes that needed updating.
Well, whether there have or there haven't in the past 10 years, in the next 10 years, there will be. And that's one of the things that you really need to do right after you document your business rules, is establish the process for changing those business rules and the associated data to those business rules. How does that work in your organization? And every organization is going to be slightly different. And then to Phil's point, how do you cascade the communication of that change through your organization? Lots of different ways you can do it. Again, manual, automated, however fancy you want to get. But at the end, you have to make sure that everybody understands what in the world's going on. Here we come back up against the cultural aspect again, because especially if you're global, right? What I say in the US does not necessarily mean the same thing when I go to Malaysia and say it in exactly the same way. The Malaysian folks will understand we're weird. We come from everywhere. But you have to make sure that the cultural differences globally, if you're a global organization, are accounted for in your data governance councils and stewardships and business processes. In my world, we had different business rules for each of our different clients. And it took a long time for us to figure out why that was. And the base reason was we grew up differently in SAP. Europe grew up one way, Malaysia grew up another way. And I shouldn't say just Malaysia, because it was Asia, China, India as well. And the US grew up a completely different way. And we all thought our way was right. And now try to throw standards against that. It's almost an impossible task. Are you in a single global client, Brian?
Yes. Yes. Our challenge is that our initial implementation was done only for part of the globe, and then we added my part. The things just didn't match.
Yep.
They didn't match. I mean, in Europe, they had metric only. Well, in the US, we got inch customers too. And so things just didn't match up. And the business rules for them were different than ours. And our customer rules, that our customers were different. So in getting that, the word is harmonized that we use. Getting that to happen is really, as you said, very challenging.
Yeah, I think so. I suppose my view of it is, we're looking probably at similar things of, systems that don't exist yet, or customers that are coming onto SAP or whatever. And there's an element of, harmonization, as you say. But then, like back to Steve's point, even then, each region, there will be localization to those requirements. So probably unit of measure between the US and Europe is a good one that you have to, the same solution may not fit both, but I suppose if you have the correct structures across the top of everything, because you're always going to have some sort of localization at a given plant or a given country or a given brand. So it's controlling all of that. So it has some sort of harmony to it, but you've got to be able to adapt to the local regions. Don't know, Mark, have you had your past experiences with some of these sort of issues, or because you're more from the sales side of it, aren't you? So
Yeah, I mean, my previous experience has been more sort of MM, and I think that my thoughts on this is about, and what you've been talking about is the guiding principles the business is going to adopt. So thinking of if the senior management aren't it takes to make an ERP work. So that's my 2 cents worth.
So Mark, to your point, one of my struggles was we started at the C level. So we started in the executive suite, right? We said, look, guys, this is important. Here's what we want you to sign off on. And they did. And we started driving it down. But the problem is, the C-suite are like squirrels, right? Meaning there's a shiny object over there today and another one over there and another one over there and another one over there. And we could not keep them focused on the importance of data, which blows me away, because when you don't have to look too far to find out there's a data breach here, there's a data breach there, or this data was corrupted in some way, which caused this negative business result. And in many ways, it's hundreds of millions of whatever your currency is. But I don't know of a good way to drive that home to the squirrels that live in the C-suite.
It's interesting that, like, during a blueprint phase or a rollout phase, everyone spends that money on consultants to build all those structures, and then over time those managers leave and they don't have that lived experience. They just want it to work from day one. But it's why do we not keep building on a solution when we had the consultants in? And for mine, it's time. People don't see the value or don't understand the value, and that's the bit I suppose we as experienced people need to be able to keep selling somehow.
Yeah, I think,
Oh,
sorry.
Go ahead, Phil. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's a bit like cybersecurity, isn't it? Like, companies are terrified of hackers and malware, spend lots of money on, bulletproofing the system so disasters can't happen in the data effectively. In some ways, data governance is trying to achieve the same thing. We're trying to prevent random acts or that will upset the data, which potentially can stop production or lose revenue or drive up cost, whatever it is. It's almost a similar concept that you're trying to keep the badness out and protect your data.
What Isaac Asimov called the ghosts in the machine.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's interesting because the best way I ever found to get those squirrels up in the C-suite engaged was when one of your large customers, and this actually happened, says to your company, how many of product X did I buy across the globe, right? And your company can't answer that question because the data, in our case, is again 3 regional systems. The data was different in all 3 systems. I mean, that question ended up coming to me. And when I went back to the C-suite and I said, well, here's the reason. And it boils down to the fact that only 17% of the data is the same in all 3 systems. They went, huh? What? Shit, we need to do something. No, fix it. And of course, that lasted for about a week and a half. And then the next big thing came along. But that was really the impetus that got the executives to at least see there was a problem. And that's the first thing you have to do is drive home in dollars and cents. If we can't tell customer X the answer to their question, we will lose Y amount of revenue. Then the executives start to get involved and they go, okay, I'm getting it now. You always have to translate it down to that before they care. But even then, once they care, they don't want to understand the difficulty. And the reality of it is, it's really freaking hard to do this stuff. And if you're not willing to fire somebody over it, don't even bother to start.
Yeah, I agree. That's my point around. If you had have continued the method when you went live, then it's much easier. But it doesn't, in the systems I've seen, it's the hardest part to do, is to keep it evolving at a standard.
Yeah. So if we were to summarize, I suppose, our discussion to this point, and we can still continue, but I suppose some of the takeouts for me was obviously the C-suite have got to be engaged in this and see it as important. You've got to identify basically the owners or stakeholders across all this data, and I don't think that's a simple task. And then you've got to have some sort of change processes in place and monitoring in amongst all that as well. Those sort of probably the high level takeouts I've got so far.
Well, and the other one is there ain't no good answer for VC objects.
Yeah, we sort of moved off VC a little bit, didn't we? So yeah. So if we just touch on VC, I suppose, for a minute, then what are the challenges that we're having with that?
So Brian's solution of download and CU table info is great. Again, it's a reactive solution, right? It's a single client solution. And where that breaks down, though, is, for example, if you go against all of the agreed upon best practices for SAP VC modeling, and you overwrite characteristics in classes, you can't trace back the difference between class A and class B easily when you start changing things, right? And again, if you're a multi-client environment, it's even tougher. And there isn't any good solution other than downloading CUCO, I think it is, for the config profile. When you're at the field level on the master data element, there's just no good solution.
So yeah, and I suppose some problems we have is just even verifying model, where the models are different between our golden client, our QA client, our production client. We end up with differences in the models at times, and it's sometimes it's just working out, are you actually testing the right data when you get to QA, for example.
But if you're a single client and you're looking at a single model, the product structure browser can actually, to your point, Phil, it can go across multiple clients. So like a gold, a QA, and a prod. And you can pull that model in from all three of those clients and look at it in the product structure browser and see some of the differences.
Yeah.
But it's one model at a time, kind of like the PMEVC, which, I had 64,000 models. That wasn't going to fly, right? But the real biggest issue is when you want to start maintaining things like object dependency syntax. That's actually, when you look at syntax, it's not stored as English in the tables, right?
No.
It's stored in I can't remember how many character blocks, but I think it's 72 character blocks of it's not encrypted text, but it's symbolized, right?
Yeah.
You really can't compare that stuff.
Yeah. And that's where, like, one option we're looking at is the eSpline tool.
Yep.
That lets us see the differences between dependency down at the syntax level. Because sometimes it's those subtle things in there that are really, really hard to find. So that tool's good for that. But Yeah, but I suppose with VC, the other important part is having, some sort of golden client set up and a, a QA system and a process to then take it through to production.
So my beef with that has always been that makes sure your model works. It doesn't make sure your data's right.
Well,
Two different questions, Phil.
no, it is two different questions. And I suppose this is where when things go to a QA client, ideally you want to get business verification that everything, works correctly. I know it's easy to get caught. Everything works beautifully in PMEVC simulation and everything explodes and does its stuff. But when you actually plug it against transactional data, that's the part that doesn't always work. So it's getting a testing regime around some of that stuff where can be a major change or even a small change sometimes.
Well, and again, quantity has a quality all of its own, right? If you have large quantities of data, you have a different problem than if you have small quantities of data.
Yeah, we just got small stuff,
Yeah. So I'm cooking as I usually am around this time.
Yep.
And I'm about ready to go pull my steaks and corn off the smoker. Last questions. Do we want to continue this conversation in the future? What do we want to do here?
Oh, it's up to, I don't know, Brian or Mark or whatever. We can take it to another layer, but potentially if that's useful. Don't know what that is yet, but we're happy to take advice or suggestions.
I'm here to learn. I'll let it flow.
If you have another meeting, I will try to attend. I think you guys are a wealth of information.